And good afternoon, everyone, from St. Louis, Missouri, and the home of the Missouri Institute of Mental Health. I'm Tom Pansella with MIMH. Thanks for taking the time to join us today as we understand, recognize, and handle anger. And I'll introduce our speaker to you in just a moment. For those of you who are new to these programs, we welcome you. We encourage everyone to submit questions or other feedback at any time during the presentation. We'll ask those questions on your behalf at the end of the program. There's a chat box to the right side of the video window. Just next to the word say, you can type in your question or your comment, click that say button. First time you do that, you'll probably have to give yourself a nickname. You should not have to go through any kind of login procedure. You'll also notice right under the video window that we do have live captioning. That's a service we started providing back in July, and we're really happy to provide that for you. It increases the accessibility of these programs. Below that, you'll see a couple of other links. There's a link to the slides as a PDF file. If you want to pop those up in a side window, you may do that. We'll be switching back and forth in the main video window, of course, but you're always welcome to pop those up on the side as well. There's also a link there to purchase CEUs if you're interested in continuing education credit for this program. CEUs are only $10 a person. We'll provide both of those links in a follow-up email as well after the program, probably tomorrow. And below that, of course, there's information about the Spring Training Institute. It wouldn't be a program if I didn't plug the Spring Training Institute. I've got to run my commercials all the time. But that's the information, the links to that website are there as well. You're welcome to take a look at that. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Lawson Calhoun. And he received a Master's of Arts in Human Relations from Webster University and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. He's earned a Healthcare Provider Instructor Certificate with the American Heart Association. He's also completed the Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, which is called the ASIST program. He is a mental health first aid instructor, and he's earned a Certificate of Completion for Human Resource Management and a certificate from the Neighborhood Leadership Academy at the University of Missouri St. Louis. He is an authorized facilitator of Stewards of Children. He's got more than 20 years of program and management experience in the social services and child welfare fields. Mr. Calhoun is the program director for the Missouri Baptist Children's Home Professional Development Institute. And Mr. Calhoun, it's a great pleasure to have you here today. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Lawson Calhoun. I'm the program director for MBCH Professional Development Institute. Our responsibility, of course, is to provide training. We're having the opportunity, and we're so pleased to have the opportunity today, to be with you to talk about understanding, recognizing, and handling anger. Throughout those more than 20 years, and of course I've had some opportunities, to get angry, but also to learn how to deal with anger, as well as specifically in working with kids and then also working with staff, in child welfare organizations. We tend to, experience some of this kind of behavior, throughout the day, year programs, what have you. And so these are the types of things that we will talk about today. And the very first thing which sometimes it's kind of a misnomer, but I think individuals feel that, or at least societal tells us that anger is really not good. It is, that's something, that's shown to, or specifically is not a good thing. But what I want to convey, especially through this particular session today, is that anger is a normal and healthy emotion. And it is that important, and especially, when, it is expressed appropriately. If we are letting go stress and then frustration, then we experience, which then helps us and keeps us, from getting stressed, but also keeps us, from getting upset. Anger, of course, when it's expressed in an inappropriate manner, we tend to blame then, or then we deal with aggression, and it can be a destructive force to the person experiencing it, as well as to those individuals, that it is subjected to. With those, as we begin to deal with anger in an inappropriate manner, of course, we end up encountering those negative things, which tends to then, offer then stress, anxiety, as well as then frustration. So if you feel that, you do not have the right, or you have the right, to express your anger, and then you want to express it, in the following manner. We have to make sure that we're responsible, for our own behavior. And we're responsible for, your own life, the choices that you make, and then the quality, of life experiences. We have to make sure then we clarify, where we are at that particular time. In those particular situations, that when we see that things, individuals, experiences, situations, that are somewhat pushing our button, then we have to make sure that we clarify our thoughts, our feelings, our needs, and then our wants as it relates specifically, to that particular situation. And we want to make sure then that we are the ones, that have to, deal with those particular or that particular situations. Here we're talking about compromise. In those particular situations that we know that there have been some triggers, that is causing us, our emotions, to begin to develop, from a negative standpoint. We need to be able to compromise with others when we want the needs which are in conflict of our anger or issues that that tends to arise, at that time. It is unreasonable, to always or to rarely get what we want. And I know in my particular situation, and I'm sure with others, we are not going to get everything that we want all the time. And so we have to be able, to make those compromises and to be able to address and to deal with, those particular situations as it relates then to that particular issue or those issues, that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, or even situational, when those particular situations that comes up. When we feel, though, that we have been, or those triggers have been pushed, that tends to, to excite us. And therefore, in those situations, we have to be, cognizant of the fact, as we look at respect. And respecting those individuals, that we're engaged in, if that trigger has been pushed, for that particular individual or that particular situation. And again, we're talking about compromise. We're talking about negotiating. And we have to be able to negotiate those particular situations, those things that we can live with, those things that will not necessarily, make us, quote, happy, but that we will be able, to live with, and as this particular caption says, have a equitable solution. And then we want to look at developing effective skills for managing, our lives as we begin to look at and examine, the difficulties, that we experience. Also, we need to assess how you have contributed to those difficulties. Looking specifically at whether we were engaged in that, and of course, we all are not perfect in every given situation, so we have to look at what those situations were that was engaged with us specifically, and how, we might need to be able to address that. And then decide, what we are willing to do differently, and how we want to be able, to make some changes, in our own behavior as it relates then to that particular situation, or that how we want, to deal with that. And addressing, those particular issues, as it relates then to that particular situation. Because as we begin to look at, what those difficulties are, and being able to chart, the differences, that we have, and how we want to make sure that we engage and to make things that we want to try those differences and to make alternatives as it relates then to that particular situation. Some feelings that leads to progressive intensive level of anger. One is uneasiness. As we begin to look at, or we engage, in certain situations that we know that has those triggers, has begun to start, we begin to feel, uneasy. We begin to feel uncomfortable. We tend to then withdraw. And I know in certain situations, when it becomes a little bit uncomfortable for me, then I tend to kind of step back, try to withdraw from that situation. And at times, just become very, very, irritable, as well as then somewhat agitated, annoyed, and then upset. Because as that emotion continuously to build, those things then continues to, to become much more greater and then becomes more intense, for us. And then certain situations, then we're actually, using this particular word, say getting mad. And then, of course, anger sets in. And then become very, very furious. And then enraged. And then as we begin to look at, some of those physical responses, based on the anger in which we are feeling. And these are some of those physical responses, that you would detect in individuals, or you would detect then in yourselves as well. And here, we are looking at clenching of fists, change in breathing. And I know with myself, as I begin to seem like that button has been pushed, and I tend to, my breathing tends to increase, and then I know, that, I am beginning to get upset, over a beginning situation. Headaches, sometimes sleep disturbance. We can't go to sleep at night, or we go to sleep and then we wake up over the night, waking up early. Upset stomach. And then number 6 says muscle tension. And so we begin to tense, that tension begins to, set in, for our muscles. Tight stomach, yelling and screaming. And the one thing that, I've experienced, I'm not a yeller or a screamer, but I've witnessed individuals that have done that. And then also those individuals, that might engage then into hitting, and then also, throwing things or breaking things. That's, in my opinion, as is really at the top, as relates to, physical responses, for those individuals, engage in anger and not actually dealing with anger in an appropriate manner. Now, 7 steps in taking responsibility. We're starting off with making a commitment to change. That's specifically for those individuals that actually see a need to change. And I think in some situations you have individuals that are not at that level yet, because they don't really see, that need. Or they're still in the process, where they're blaming other individuals, for their anger. And we'll talk a little bit later on how we have to accept responsibility, for our own anger. Nobody else can control that. It is in us in order then to make sure, that we're controlling that. And so with that, then we have to make that commitment that we will change. Next, we need to be aware, of how our behavior, not only affects us, but how it affects others as well. And so we need to seek activities, that we see, that can be pleasurable, those activities, that could actually benefit us as well, to help us to be, or to relieve ourselves, from stress, from the anxiety, and also from frustration as well. And then people, and this is a good quote that I like here too, that says people who feel good about their lives are less negative and less angry. So if, when we talk about self-esteem, we're looking at those individuals that really feel good about themselves. And even if there is a situation where, you're being put down, then of course, you can reflect that off, because that you're feeling good about yourself, and that's just someone else's opinion. And then the next then says, those individuals, of course, then are happy, and then they're accepting responsibility but also then they're taking good care of themselves, as we begin to make sure, that our self-esteem, is good. Speaking of taking care of oneself, we talk about self-care. And self-care, in my opinion, is the core of taking responsibility for ourselves. And specifically, this particular author refers to it as balance your life. And you're balancing your life, with nutrition. We have to make sure then that we're eating, the appropriate food. Those foods that will help, to generate, the kinds of things, within our bodies, that will help us, to continue to, to move on. Rest is very, very important. And so we have to, get the appropriate rest. And I know from time to time, when I do not get the appropriate rest and I still need some, that sleep time, it seems like sometimes then any little thing that might push my button, but then I'm able then, to adjust and to deal with that. So adequate rest is very important, as well as in regular exercise. As we begin to look at, how we might be able, to do that regular exercise, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And it says people and activities that you enjoy. We really need to center ourselves around those individuals, that give us joy, that will help us, to address and to deal with, various situations, as having a support group, but being able, to participate, with family, friends, and those individuals, that we engage with, that give us some happiness. And then personal growth, being able, to do those things that's going to help uplift us and helping us to deal with certain situations. And then things to look forward to, having a schedule or having a planned, activity, for those things that we know that we will enjoy doing and addressing various activities and situations, within, that schedule. And this refers to then, looking at, our resources and broadening those resources as well as that support system, as I alluded to earlier, and having individuals that you can go and talk with. Those individuals, that will not, be judgmental, but will be honest with you in specific situations and give you support, as it relates, to that particular situation, but also being able to help you, to deal with, whatever that particular, issue is. And it says, don't limit yourself to, the resources, because you want to have as many of those resources as you can, whether that's reading particular resource books or visiting other endeavors as well, as we talk specifically about, that support system, and then also creating choices, as much as possible for yourself and not blocking yourself or putting yourself, within a corner. And the other one that I like is that of having a clear boundaries and setting those limits for yourself and reinforcing that, in order to be responsible, for yourself and then for others as well. And this one particular, it says, don't do things just to please others. Give yourself permission, to say no. I know there's been situations that I've been involved with, that individuals have asked specifically, for me to do things, and I know that I really do not have the time, but because the individual asked me, that kind of gave me that sense of, that you kind of need it. But then after I think about it, I think, well, I really can't do that. And then I start feeling, that somewhat, I guess in the situation, either that, I'm becoming somewhat resentful, or maybe even, being abused, or in some situation, being used. So we want to make sure, that we do not avoid this step in being able, to say no, if indeed, no is the correct response. And then next we're talking about developing goals. And as we have talked specifically, or we've learned, I guess, in the past when we develop goals, we want to make sure, that these goals are manageable. So we want to break those goals down very specifically, so we'll know that it is manageable and that we will be able to know whether we have accomplished those or not. And next, I'd really like, the follow-up. It says regularly check on the progress, of the goals, and making sure then, that we're on target. And then the next one talks about, so you create your own destiny. As we begin to look at those goals, and they're clear, and then we know, where we're going with those, and we know when those goals have actually been, completed at that point. And then number 7 basically says, let go. If something is unresolved, take care of it and move on. If there is an element you don't have control over, make peace with it, accept it, and let it go. And I know there's been situations, where I've been involved specifically, where I think the outcome that exists, is really not the desired outcome at that point. But then I don't really have the total control over, that outcome, and I still want to hang on to it and try to make sure, that, it changed. But all of that does is just helps me to become more and more upset. And it gives me, those unpleasant situations. I become frustrated and what have you. But this particular author talks about very specifically, if we don't have control over it, we need to just let it go and then move on. And being able to do what I suggest is, that's something, we should be able to live with. And that's essentially basically what this particular slide talks about as well. If you only have control over yourself, you don't have control over others. And so we want to make sure that we understand that. And those things that we can control, we do so. And those things that's outside of our control or our comfort level, then, we need to, let that go. And the last little bullet here is, it says that you are responsible for your own happiness. And that is a true statement. Nobody can make you happy. You make the happiness, for yourself. Handling anger. 2 general principles, of handling anger. And that is, as we started off, suggesting that anger is a common emotion. And then anger needs to be expressed for health adjustment. And those are two critical general principles. And I think if nothing else happens from this, and we understand that anger is a common emotion, and that we actually need to be able to express our anger, and we express our anger in this manner in which that it is appropriate, and that's when it then becomes a healthy situation for us. Understanding your experience of anger. This typically talks about how society, basically suggests is that anger is wrong. And I know back, as a child, as early adulthood, I really felt that anger was something that was negative, of something that I really should not experience at all. Anger is associated with anxiety. Anger is used to control and intimidate others. And fear of anger, fear of your anger, fear of others' anger, and then anger is normal reaction to the stimulus. Whatever that issue is, whatever that behavior is, that it is a normal situation. And then believe that you are unable to control your anger. Psychological response with anger, and that's that survival emotion. Pretending, that you don't get angry, is a miss, of course. We all get angry, and so we all have to make sure, that we're dealing with anger, in a healthy manner. Blocked and unexpressed anger does not go away. So we must deal with anger but we have to deal with anger, in a manner in which, we need to deal with it from an appropriate standpoint. So when not expressed assertively and appropriately, anger tends to pop up in destructive ways. And so it will indeed cause resentment, and it will also cause hostility. So we need to begin to look at how we can decrease, the intensity of anger. And again, we're looking at how we want to clarify, what exists at that particular time. And these are three critical things that we really need to focus on. What the need is at the time, and then also the thoughts, based on that particular situation, as well as the feeling in regards to that particular situation. Express them. If others are not supportive of caring, problem solve appropriate ways, to get your needs met. So we really need to be able to look at those alternate ways, or those specific ways, that we need to address or need to be able to use in order to be able, to get, our problem solved. And I'm a strong believer of timeout. If it's a particular situation, that is really becoming very, very intense, then we really need to be able to step back, take time out, and then once that, we're that button seemingly, has been somewhat lessened, then we can come back and then we can deal with it at that point. But I think timeout is very, very crucial. And again, exercise, relaxation techniques, is very, very good, to help us, to reduce stress, as well as then to decrease the body tension. Writing about your feelings. We're talking about journaling. I have not been a supporter of journaling, throughout, but I am now, because it does help me to be able to get a better full grasp of what my feelings are, as well as then to be able, to address whatever the issue is at that particular time. And then to decide how, you're going to take responsibility and then take positive actions. We look at those alternatives as to how we want to deal with that particular situation, as very specifically, how we want to appropriately, walk through and to address those things, especially, those that we have control over. Barriers to expressing anger. Number one refers to feel disapproval, fear of power of your own anger. And my sense there is, feel that you're going to actually lose control, denial of your anger, because in denial, we then will, that build up of stress, or we'll get stressed out, we get tired, and then it could, from a psychological standpoint, or even physiological standpoint, we will actually then, become sick. Allowing others to deny us of our right to be angry. We do have a right to become angry if indeed the situation, seemingly demands that. But it's the manner in which, we really need to deal with it. How appropriately, we deal with, our anger is the key. And then says the avoidance of feelings. Out of touch with emotional experience. Not aware when we are angry, sad, or happy. We really need to be able to determine whether we are sad, whether we are angry, or whether we are actually happy. The next step is the inappropriate expression of anger. And that's when we're looking at violence, and then we're looking at rage. So we must take responsibility of our own emotion or our own emotional experience. Acknowledge that an inappropriate expression of anger is not acceptable. We cannot continue to express our anger in an inappropriate fashion. So we have to accept that. Learn anger management. and going through the various techniques, of how to address, or how to deal with, your anger. Then identify, your behavior, has the effect and the harm on others. And again, when we look at that, we accept it is our responsibility, but it is and how it does, affect, others, and then how it affects ourselves as well. Then we begin to look at penalties for not expressing anger. And those are depression, anxiety, and guilt. Depression, as we know, it leaves us feeling, that we are incompetent. We can't deal with that particular situation. The anxiety, is often, indicates that fear. And then the guilt, which basically says, that it's wrong. It's wrong, for us to get angry. And of course, it's not wrong for us to get angry, but it's how, we, appropriately deal with it. Self-destructive activities. And these are basically just a list of some of those things that happens, when we're involved in those self-destructive activities. And those are drinking, drugs, eating, which mask our feelings, the psychosomatic illnesses, the headaches, the gastrointestinal problems, hypertension. Aggression, the violence act, that some engaged in. We were talking about the physical, and then the throwing things, those kinds of things, and then disguised anger. The hostile humor, the nagging, the silence and withdrawal, withholding sex, and then displacement. And here's some ways to deal with anger. We want to recognize anger, when you are experiencing it. We have to be able to recognize, what that anger is, at the time in which, we are experiencing it. And then to express it appropriately, when it occurs. We often have to make sure then, that we are appropriately, handling, our anger. Using the I statement. And here we're talking about how we feel. And just basically express, what those extra feelings are. And owning, that feeling. Be courteous, be respectful, and then assertive in the manner in which, we engage, at that time. Intense anger, again, we have to acknowledge and take responsibility, for dealing with our anger. And we deal with our anger in that, appropriate manner. Through exercise, through activities, talk, express your emotions, and then journal writing. I think talking and expressing your emotions, but doing so, in a tone that is not suggestive, to be negative. Doing so, in a manner in which it could be a calming situation. If you engage, in a disagreement with another person, and that individual voice is elevated, you don't want to elevate your voice. Your voice should be reduced, so it should be more in a low key, a low tone. Then the steps for letting go of anger. Again, awareness, of your feelings and your behaviors. Taking responsibility, for your emotions. Your attitude. Your attitude will basically let you know whether or dictate, success or failure. So if you have a negative attitude, of course, you will need to expect a negative outcome. Self-talk. What you say to yourself will determine, how you think and feel. We're in a situation where you know that you are really becoming very, very angry. And one of the things that I've learned is that, and we have a lot of conversations going on within our mind, from time to time. And if we basically just, I guess one simple statement or word just says stop. By saying stop to yourself, that helps you then, to reframe, to think about what you are going or where you're headed at that point, and kind of reframe from that. It says it is your choice, and it says we have to make sure that we take, responsibility. Again, we want to look at resources and support systems. I tend to spend time at the library, looking at various books, other things that's there, even on the website, various websites, and looking at various resources that I can use, to deal with very specific situations, and then also have at least 2 or 3 individuals that I can go to and talk with, a mentor, a friend, family member that I can talk with that will help me to focus in and to be able to set, positive change. So looking at those individuals or having those individuals, and those tangible resources, that would be able to help in making those positive change. Self-care behaviors. Again, people who take care of themselves, they feel better about themselves. They feel better about others. They have more energy and are more likely, to be happy in situations, and that situations, will not allow individuals then, to push your button or then to get you off, on the wrong track. Develop positive self-esteem, being able to feel good about ourselves, developing those positive alternative responses, to counter, those old anger responses, that we've used in the past. And then this particular author suggests then we need to practice. Once we know specifically, some of those steps that we need to use, then we need to practice those in the manner in which, we know that our buttons, can be pushed, or those triggers are engaged, and then how we might, be able to deal with those. So we want to develop some of those situations in order then to be able to practice the responses, that we are newly developing in order then to be able to deal with those. And again, keeping the journal and keeping track to reinforce, our positive change. And then it also talks about some dysfunctional patterns, which are to keep us, from the progress and then the change, as far as, our desires. So that concludes, the topic. And I just listed some things here in summary, that we will go through. And one is just to deal with self-care. It says controlled anger is positive. Know what pushes your button. Express it appropriately, when it happens. Be aware sometimes anger is used as a control and to intimidate others. And so in those situations, we also need to use those steps that we talked about as it relates then to let it go. The best way to handle anger, says when you're angry, you can choose to express or to suppress emotions. And here's the differences. Expression. So this is the act of conveying your anger. Expression ranges from a reasonable and a rational discussion to violent outbursts. Suppression this is an attempt to hold in or to ignore your anger. It also includes passive aggressive responses in which you don't express your anger. You don't express your anger constructively, but instead it's used in a scheme of retaliation. Ideally, you choose constructive expression, stating your concerns and needs clearly and directly without hurting others or trying to control them. And I think mainly, you want to make sure, then that anger is a normal emotion, and we just need to make sure that we deal with it, appropriately. And thank you.
All right, and thank you, and we'll open the floor for any questions. Encourage you to use the chat window alongside the caption window to submit your questions or other feedback. And in the meantime, remind you that you can purchase CEUs by using the link that's underneath the chat window. We did have a question come in, and I think that the bulk of your presentation presupposes that desire for change and the people
Right.
that are in a position of wanting to change. What how do counselors help people who refuse that acknowledgement step, that they themselves play any role in their feelings of anger and only want to still be in that blame others mode?
And I think in those situations that individuals will help that individual to determine, to do a walk back, so to speak, and have them to take a look at the outcomes of those situations that they were involved with, when they were angry at that point. And as well as in, to ask the question, how does that make you feel, at that point? Having them to also to look at ways in which that if there is a need, to make some change, have them to think about how they might be able to do that. If you don't make any changes, what will happen? If you do make changes, then what outcome, will you experience then at that point? And having them to compare those and look very specifically, at that. We talked a little bit about, we was talking about when those negative thoughts appear, in our minds, using a technique of just saying something simple as stop, to help us to reframe, from that pattern, that thought pattern, and then refocus in on something, that's a little bit more positive, and having individuals then to go through those various steps. And hopefully, that will help them to begin to start thinking about there is a need, for me to do something different. It's not going to happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight as it started. And so, of course, it's not going to happen overnight, for change. But at least, the first step, is the goal. And then you move from step 1 to step 2 and so forth, from that standpoint.
And you talked about the progression of anger. How do you get people to recognize those patterns? How do you get people to say, okay, I have to analyze this, because it happens fairly rapidly sometimes, internal to a person, right, to that reaction and that violent outburst. How do you get them to stop?
And I think one is, we have to help that individual to identify, what their feelings are, at the point of, their anger. And because it's more of a cognitive process, and as they begin to feel what that is, then they need to be able then to say if that is something, that I enjoy, or if that's something that, I need, to make, some change with. And then be able to process then from an individualized standpoint, what will make them happy, at that point, or what change they need to make, at that particular time.
Is there a too young of an age or an age range that you're not able to help people address anger issues, or is there an ideal age range to help people develop anger issues?
I think as long as an individual, from a cognitive standpoint, can think and can process, what's current, as well as in being able to visualize, what that change is. And as long as they can do that process, can follow through, with that understanding, then I think at that point you can begin to work with that particular individual. And so I don't know if there's a magical age there or not, but I think it's just the fact that, where the individual, can understand and can process, that information.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming into the box right now. So we will take this opportunity to wrap things up for today.
Right.
Folks, we do have 2 more web conferences coming up next week, so we encourage you to stay tuned to the website related to that. There's one on Tuesday and there's one on Thursday. The one on Tuesday deals with how to support LGBTQ youth, and that's the Connect, Accept, Respond, and Empower model.
Yes.
And then the one on Thursday will begin a new series for us. We're going to do 6 programs this year that are connected directly with the University of Missouri St. Louis's 50th Jubilee. And so we're going to be recognizing UMSL's contributions to the mental and behavioral health community. And our first program on that Jubilee series will be next Thursday with Dr. Tom User. So I encourage you to look back at those. Again, you'll be getting a follow-up email probably tomorrow that'll have the link to the CEU purchase as well as the link to the slides. And you'll also get an evaluation to fill out if you like for today's program. We appreciate your time in joining us today. Mr. Calhoun, we appreciate your time and your expertise as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.